Joining us now is U.S. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator Murphy, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
What do you make of what the new NRA president, his line is about gun control? It's saying that we need to be training every U.S. citizen in the use of standard military firearms to defend against tyranny by the government. How does that fit into what you have been participating in, which is the legislative debate about gun safety?
Yeah, well, this guy is really kind of the wingnut's wingnut, and he exposes what the NRA has really become. I mean, the NRA kind of announced this weekend that they are morphing into a paramilitary group, that essentially they are going to be advocating for armed resistance to the U.S. government. And, listen, as is true in a lot of politics and a lot of public policy, what's behind this, I think, is money. I mean, the fact is that the gun manufacturers, who are a big part of the NRA's constituency, have been hurting, right? I mean, they used to sell guns to half of Americans. Now they sell guns to only about a third of Americans. And so a new citizen paramilitary force is a pretty nice business model for the gun industry. So when you got an NRA president going out there and saying that we need to arm Americans in order to fight our government, well, that sells a lot more guns, and that means more dues into the NRA, and that means a little bit bigger budget to play with. So, I think this is just what the NRA has become. It's not a gun safety organization. It's not an instruction organization. It is now a voice for the gun industry, and the gun industry needs a handful of citizens to buy a whole mess of guns in order to stay solvent. And I think that their choice of this radical new leader is kind of a signal that that's the direction that they're permanently headed in.
We have seen this divergence in what direction the states have gone in since Newtown, and since there's been such a discussion about gun violence in the country following the Newtown massacre. And there have been bipartisan efforts, like in your state, which is a blue state, but had a bipartisan effort on this issue to move forward on gun reform. Other states that are in total red hands, that are in full Republican control, have gone the other direction. We've seen states like Alabama and Kansas and others try to essentially nullify federal gun laws, saying if there is anything that happens federally that they perceive to be an infringement on the Second Amendment, that those laws will be null and void in those states, and they will not allow them to be enforced. How do you view those measures?
Well, they're laughable. I mean, let's look at the context of nullification. Nullification was last used by southern states to try to eviscerate civil rights legislation, to try to prevent states from basically enforcing desegregation. And frankly, I think history will look back on this round of nullification about as kindly as it did on the last round. It's laughable also because it's a total bastardization of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not an absolute right. It is not a God-given right. It has always had conditions upon it, just like the First Amendment has. And this idea that the Second Amendment was put in there in order to allow citizens to fight their government is insane. If that was the case, we wouldn't have also included treason in the United States Constitution. We basically said that if you do take arms up against the government, we're going to knock your block off. And that's what the early presidents ended up doing in the Shays Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion. So the Second Amendment is not designed to allow a citizenry to arm itself against the government. And nullification is just another example of states not really understanding the true nature of that amendment.
Do you think we're actually moving into a phase, though, where we're actually going to be hearing from the other side of this argument, from the NRA side of this argument, sort of fundamentalism in terms of what people ought to have access to? I mean, if their president now argues that the basis for the Second Amendment, the basis for all of their political stands, is the idea of arming people to take up weapons against the government, don't you expect them to be arguing for legalized machine guns, for legalized plastic guns that can evade detection, which we know can now be 3D printed, even if it is crudely, that they should be looking at the kinds of weaponry that could do more damage even against a military force?
Yeah, listen, I think that they're going to look at the 3D gun industry, to the extent it exists or will exist, as a new source of money. And I absolutely am confident that the NRA is going to fight our efforts, which are underway today, to try to put some limitations and regulations around these 3D guns, should they be marketable in the near future. But ultimately, the NRA isn't going to win this argument. In the end, we are going to pass a bill that puts all gun sales under the rubric of background check context, because the NRA is just moving so far out of the mainstream that it is going to make it a lot easier for the senators and the representatives that are on the edge to side with 90% of Americans who want these changes. I think the NRA overestimates the degree to which they can just move themselves off the cliff. At some point, members of Congress are going to realize that these guys don't speak for anybody other than the gun industry. And I really do believe that the Vice President and the President are as sincere as I am, and Senator Blumenthal and Senator Manchin, that we're not letting this issue go. And frankly, the NRA is giving us fodder to try to bring some of these senators back into the conversation with weekends like this last one.
U.S. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. It's good to have you here. Thank you. It is kind of interesting to think about what the two sides of this argument are right now. Like, if it's a seesaw, where's the fulcrum, right? That the NRA and the rest of the country, when the NRA tells that story, they like to imagine that the fulcrum's sort of right in the middle of the seesaw. But right now, we know that with polling, the NRA is on one side of the seesaw, 90% of the American public is on the other side. We now know that on the NRA side is also the argument that we must be taking up arms in order to potentially fight a military battle against the U.S. government. So it's that argument and maybe 10% of the population on their side of the argument, and everything else that is normal in argument and that represents 90% of American opinion on the other. That is a seesaw that only goes one direction. I'll be right back.
I think it's very important that people are allowed to be armed. They didn't legalize guns for the purpose of shooting and hunting. They were always fearful of the government becoming tyrannical.
Most globalists would like to see national governments yield up portions of their sovereignty to transnational institutions like the European Commission. And of course, in order to achieve that and to prevent a global government from being overthrown would require the disarmament of the citizens of individual countries.
The United States Constitution is the highest law in the land. Yet today, almost all politicians ignore it, pervert it, abridge it, infringe it, and even violate it with impunity.
The so-called war on terror is really a psychological war against the people of the world, certainly including the American people.
Clearly, there were criminal elements in the government that were orchestrating the event and allowing it to happen, knowing that they could radically re-engineer our society into the oppressive state it's becoming.
Is it any wonder we, the people, protest when politicians reward corporate greed, emit fiat currency, stifle internet freedom, and foment perpetual wars?
Somewhere upwards of 175 million people were slaughtered in the 20th century by their government. When you disarm a population, you leave them open to the worst criminals of all, which are government criminals.
Consequently, Americans see their country degenerating into a lawless, paramilitary police state before their very eyes.
There are many people in the gun control lobby to whom one cannot attribute ignorance. And I take in particular ones who are public officials. They have taken an oath or affirmation to support the Constitution. And when you take an oath or affirmation to support the Constitution, you're at least implicitly saying that you understand what the Constitution means, because you can't possibly support something that you don't understand what it means.
Under our constitutional order, we have taken the principle of oaths farther than has any civic order in written history. As an officer myself of the Navy of the United States, I think about this all the time.
Who is trying to disarm we the people when the Bill of Rights guarantees the right to keep and bear arms to preserve our freedom? And why was the Department of Homeland Security set up in the District of Columbia when the Constitution already provides for Homeland Security in every one of the 50 states?
The whole idea of the militia was to protect the states against the federal government. It was to be one of the very serious, tangible checks and balances against a federal government that might conceivably grow beyond the limits of what are in primarily Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution.
You can come after the people, you can abuse the people, but if you do it too much, you're going to pay for it. Usually they will depose the government.
It's clear some group is trying to take over America, as too many Americans stand idly by and watch. By eroding the two most important powers we the people have, the power of the purse and the power of the sword, usurpers and rogue politicians are attempting to destroy the land of the free and the home of the brave.
It always comes down to the right of the people to keep and bear arms. That is the single most significant detriment to those who would create a new world order.
Let them try. Molan Love, in production now.